We're very pleased to be able to welcome Kelly McAdoo. Kelly joined the leadership of our city. When exactly, Kelly?
May of 2024, so about
Okay,
15
so it's
months ago
been,
now. Yeah.
I keep thinking it's recent. That's because I'm so old.
Yeah, still
Um,
feels
but
recent, but a lot has happened in the last year and a half.
but a
So
lot has happened, and one of the things that's happened and is happening is this question about what is going to happen to Paseo Nuevo, the big shopping mall, and the desire that has been widespread, and many of us share, to have housing built right in the downtown area as a way of dealing with the housing issues of the city, the shortage of housing that's affordable and for workforce people, and also a way of revitalizing uh, the central part of Santa Barbara. So, and this in this particular case, as I understand it, the staff, even before Kelly got here, or especially before, began to develop a negotiation with the leaseholder to see how that kind of housing focus could replace much of what is no longer going to be viable, like the Macy's building and so forth. And Kelly has picked up that ball, and so there's been a rising tempo, as you expect in Santa Barbara, of controversy and questioning. That is part of how we do things here, and I've always been not ashamed of it. Um, I'm actually thinking it's a good thing, but it can sound like, well, I won't even characterize it. Anyway, Kelly is going to present what she wants to present about this project. I will, and I have some questions already. We had hoped that Rob Fredericks, who is director of the Housing Authority, would be able to be here, but he's out of town. But he did make statements about this project that embody some really important questions. And then the Planning Commission of the city had an important interaction with Kelly and folks, and they adopted a number of principles that, and I had hoped that maybe someone from the Planning Commission would be on the panel, but we do have some people signed up here who are on the Planning Commission, and they may want to speak. But in the meantime, I'll convey what I understand from their conversation as questions uh, to Kelly. So, with all of that, um, thanks for being here, Kelly, and it's a good opportunity for the many of us who have not yet had a chance to interact with you. We can do that as well. That's another function of today's roundtable. Kelly, go
great.
take it.
Thanks, Dick. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And, I know you said you didn't want a dog and pony show, but there'll be a little bit of a presentation on the front end, just to share context and a little bit of the background of the project. I know a number of folks on this call have heard or seen this presentation, in a variety of formats, but really here to answer questions first and foremost. And so happy to engage in that dialogue. I wanted to introduce, we have a number of the team members who are here, wanted to take an opportunity to introduce them. First, I think Anthony Valdez is our new Deputy City Administrator, overseeing our Housing and Homelessness Division, the Downtown Services team, and also doing work around State Street and economic development. So really sort of taking over a really critical mix of services for the city, a new position that was created with this year's budget. And he joined us from the city of Bakersfield. So great to have him on board. I think it's been 6 weeks, 7 weeks, Anthony. So he's getting quickly up to speed on all things Santa Barbara, but really glad to have him on the team. I think many of you know Tess Harris, who is our State Street Master Planner, but also Jill of all trades. She is kind of stepped in on a lot of special projects in the city administrator's office, and in particular has been helping us on the Paseo Nuevo elements of the project and helping us with this project. So she's here with us today. And then wanted to do two introductions of folks you probably don't know, Dina Beltzer and Patricia Flynn, who the city hired before I got here. Dina runs a firm called Strategic Economics. Pat is with the Maxima Group. They're both financial consultants, have been really strong backgrounds in the real estate sector, both on the public and private side of deals. Patricia specializes in ground leases in particular, and Dina has just worked with a lot of city organizations over the years and helping analyze the financials of these projects to ensure that technical expertise and the financial expertise is provided to the city organization. So really grateful to have them on the team. It is a very small world. Dina and I, she was up in the Bay Area, so even before I got here, she had been hired by the city, but we have a lot of people that we know in common through local government. So just really happy to have her on our team supporting us. And then obviously Mayor Rouse is on here. I'm not sure if he's going to speak at all, but I'm happy to have him chime in at any point. I'm sure he's here just to listen, but glad to have him on as well. So I think with that, I'll get started on the presentation. And again, I think as Dick mentioned, please, if you have questions during the presentation, put those in the chat. And then at the end, happy to answer other questions verbally as well. So I don't know, Tess, if you can share the presentation or share your screen. Great. Okay, next slides.
Gonna give me 1 second. I'm gonna.
Yep, sure, no worries. I'm gonna make it a little bigger. Great, thanks. Okay, so just wanted to share just a high-level overview of the project description as it was submitted by the Alliance Bernstein team for the redevelopment of Paseo Nuevo. This was part of the pre-application and the project description. So basically, and we'll show some site plans and things, so we'll get more into the details. As part of the project, the proposal is to demolish the former vacant Macy's building at the corner of State and Ortega. It's about 135,000 square feet. That building, when looking at that, there was an analysis of whether it could be adaptively reused, but unfortunately the building is functionally obsolete and so needs to be demolished. So in that space where the Macy's building is currently, there would be the development. Oops, if someone can mute. Development of 233 residential rental units. There is parking structure underneath a good portion of the mall there. That's what we call parking lot 1. And we'll go through the parking program a little later, but as part of the residential development, the goal is to basically reserve 1 parking space for each of those residential units in parking lot 1. There'd be a new 20,000 square foot retail space at the corner of State and Ortega, along with the addition of 28 parking spaces for that retail space that would be added to parking lot 1. And then the other piece of the project is the development of approximately 80 units of income restricted affordable rental housing units on a portion of parking lot 2, which is at the corner of, well, it sort of runs along Canon Perdido between State and Chapala. And so that would require the demolition of approximately 186 parking spaces in that parking lot, and then development of 80 units of the affordable housing there. And we'll talk more and get into more detail about that, but we'll go to the next slide. Oops. So a little bit of background on Paseo Nuevo. The mall was originally a city redevelopment agency project. The property was originally acquired between 1987 and 89 and assembled to basically facilitate the development of that mall. And a lot of acquisition from private property owners along the 700 and 800 blocks of State Street. And the goal was to build this 400,000 square foot urban open air retail shopping center, which was, built and has been the Paseo Nuevo Mall since then. There were also 2 other parking structures that were built to support the mall. parking lot 2, which we talked about at Chapala and Canon Perdido, and parking lot 10, which is on Ortega on the other side of State Street. So all of those, along with parking lot 1, are reserved and a part of the Paseo Nuevo Mall project, and that's important, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Obviously, Paseo Nuevo is a key for the city center district of State Street, as identified in the draft master planning process. And really, this is a goal to bring more housing into downtown. And I've talked a lot in my first kind of year and a half with the city about how Santa Barbara is probably about 10 years behind other cities in terms of understanding the importance of bringing housing into downtown to revitalize and to reinvigorate downtowns as the retail environment changes, as the office market has changed. And so I think Tess has this great statistic that she often shares. Most cities have about 25% of their downtowns that are residential uses, and in Santa Barbara, we're at about 5%. And so just, in terms of kind of what urban planning looks like now, housing has become a really important piece of keeping downtowns vital. So next slide. So right now, the Macy's building and many of the inline shopping centers are controlled by a group called Alliance Bernstein. They are an investment management firm, and they are the owners of a ground lease that sits. Basically, they own the improvements on top of the parcels that were formerly owned by the city's redevelopment agency. In I believe it was 2019, they loaned money to the former owner of the mall, who then defaulted on that loan. And so AB got title to the ground lease through that loan default. So as they started talking with the city in 2021 about what to do on the site, a lot of conversation about whether they should just sell their interest in the ground lease to try to recoup some of that cost, and instead decided that they would work in partnership with the city to develop, sort of redevelop the mall in this concept. So they have assembled a development team to help them with that process. The Arcturus Group, Georgetown Company, Gensler as the primary architect, and locally supporting them, Clay Arell at AB Design Studio, and then obviously Mullen and Hensel as their local legal representatives. And so, as I mentioned, AB is not a developer, and so they brought this team together to work with the city on this project. So the control of the property through these ground leases and other easements is kind of critical to understanding why this deal has been structured the way it is. Originally, there was a 75-year ground lease with the city's redevelopment agency that began in 1989. That's important, and the redevelopment was important for the city because in our city charter, we have a ground lease restriction or a lease restriction of 50 years. So we, as the city, cannot enter into longer leases. But the redevelopment agency was not subject to those same provisions, and so was able to do these 75-year ground leases. In 2011, throughout the state of California dissolved local redevelopment agencies. And at that time, we had to go through a process where the redevelopment agency had to identify all of the properties that the redevelopment agency owned and submit an asset management plan to the State Department of Finance. In that plan, the goal was to sell off redevelopment agency properties and provide tax proceeds or proceeds of the sale to other taxing entities. So the county, the school district, cities, to make up for the property tax that was lost in redevelopment. At that time, a financial analysis was done and submitted to the state that looked at the value of these properties, the length of time on the ground leases that was remaining. And the State Department of Finance confirmed that because of the encumbrances of the ground lease and the other restrictions, these properties really had no value and did not need to be sold in that sort of disposition process of the redevelopment agency. So instead, the properties returned to the city at that time and were transferred from the redevelopment agency to the city. And so now we have the city charter provision that restricts leases longer than 50 years and does not allow for an extension of those leases. The leases currently have 40 years left on them. And because of that term, they are not, it is not, when you look at the finances of trying to redevelop the site, you cannot amortize the development costs over that 40-year term and make a reasonable return on investment. So again, we talked about the other thing that is controlling over these sites is what's called the reciprocal easement agreement. And that is an agreement between the city, Alliance Bernstein, and the owners of the former Nordstrom property, which is also on the site. And that is a group called Shop Off. And we are three parties to this reciprocal easement agreement that also controls and dictates the parking requirements. So all three of us have to agree to the uses allowed on the site, to what happens to the parking, and currently no residential is allowed on this site as a result of that reciprocal easement agreement. So that needs to be amended, and the ground leases would need to be extinguished in order to allow for the housing development to occur. So next slide. That was a long-winded background on the site, but I think it's really important in terms of understanding kind of where we are. So this is the current ground lease outlined in red that Alliance Bernstein holds, and you'll see the Nordstrom site. That is a separate ground lease. I'll also highlight that there is another ground lease that overlays this, where sort of right behind where the Tondi Gelato building is. It's where Victoria's Secret, there's a block there that is owned and ground leased by another group called Otts Parma. And so AB actually doesn't control, even though it shows this as the AB parcel, there is a separate ground lease that is over that and is not included as part of this development. Next slide. So here's kind of where we've been to date. Obviously, as I mentioned, a lot of this conversation started before I came to the city, so I've had to quickly get up to speed on the history of this project and what's happened to date. The initial negotiations began between AB and the city in 2022. In September of 23, the City Council authorized staff to negotiate a project agreement with Alliance Bernstein. I think there was, I believe it was in May of 23, a public presentation that was done that sort of talked about why the parcels had no value as identified by the State Department of Finance, and kind of the mechanics of the deal. And I think that's really important background that was presented at a city council meeting. And then, continued the conversation, and the council authorized, as part of these conversations, the transfer of the land to Alliance Bernstein has been part of the conversation throughout this timeline. So in February of 2024, this is also an important event that happened. The state Housing and Community Development Department exempted the mall and the land from the provisions of the Surplus Lands Act. So it allows us to dispose of this property in a different manner because of the restrictions and encumbrances on the property versus what's outlined in the State Surplus Lands Act. March 2024, there was an initial project agreement that had a 500-unit housing unit development program over the Macy's building and other parts of the shopping center. And from March until June of this past year, we have been working together to really look at the financial viability. It was determined that 500-unit project was going to be cost prohibitive. And so that we had to really go back to sort of looking at a modified project. And so that modified project came to council on August 5th. And since August 5th, we have been out and about sharing this concept and presentation with a number of stakeholders. We've gone to Housing Authority, we've done HLC concept review, Planning Commission concept review, the Downtown Parking Committee, Chamber of Commerce, Downtown Business Improvement Association, SBCAN, and a number of other stakeholder groups, along with some community open houses. Next slide. So, so here is kind of the comparison of what's existing on site versus what's proposed in the new project. And so obviously no housing existing on site. There's about 240,000 square feet of retail. That does exclude the Nordstrom building. The proposal includes currently the 233 market rate units, the affordable units of 80 units. I will note that that exceeds what they are required to produce on site, which is 24 required if they want to take advantage of state density bonus, which they have indicated they want to do to exceed the city's charter height limit. But that would require them to only have 24 deed restricted affordable units. They are maintaining about 125,000 square feet of retail. They are maintaining the art museum and theater as spaces for nonprofit uses for those uses. As indicated previously, parking lot 1 will increase the total number of parking spaces. You can see from 572 to 600. And then the residential parking per unit will be 1 per unit. No parking is required for those housing units, but the developer has indicated they want to include residential parking. The current building height is about 66 feet. They are proposing a building that would be 75 feet high on the Macy's site and 70 feet on Lot 2, and we'll see some renderings here shortly. And then again, the reduction in parking spaces in Lot 2 for the affordable units would go from 569 to 383 units. So next, I think we'll get into some pictures. So these are just sort of design inspiration that the architects used in coming up with the initial project designs that they've put forth. Again, some retail inspiration as well for, looking at the local context and making sure that what is developed here really fits in with the community. So here's just an overview. You can see Ortega Street at the bottom, Chapala running the length of the slide. And then you can see where the Macy's building is, where that would be the new multifamily residential building construction. And at the top end of the slide, you can see where the deed restricted affordable units would be constructed next to the Canary Hotel. Next slide. And then this is just looking again from going down Chapala Street, and just you can see kind of the context of the parking structure, Nordstrom's, and looking down heading towards the water. Next slide. So this is again the sort of site overview, and you can just from the aerial view. And I would highlight that the retail uses that are controlled by that other ground lease are the retail use right next to the Balboa building and sort of right below it. So those are actually controlled by the Otts Parma ground lease. So AB has the retail that runs from Canon Perdido and along Chapala. Next slide. Again, this would be the Paseo that would run from State Street to Chapala. Just some sort of conceptual renderings of how that sort of pass through would be improved. And again, this is just some of the renderings of what some of the private open spaces in the development would look like. Next slide. This is a sort of site rendering from the corner of State and Ortega, shows the new proposed market there, along with the residential units up behind it, which would be stepped back. So you'd still have kind of a pedestrian scale walking along State Street. The residential units would be stepped back. Next slide. And then this is the view down that Paseo from State to Chapala. Next slide. Again, another public space in the middle of the mall that would be re-envisioned kind of behind the Balboa building. And then this is just sort of comparing heights along State Street. As most folks know, there is a grade as you head down to the waterfront. So this shows if you're looking at the front of the buildings and you see Balboa building and then this new construction from the front, Balboa and this building would look about the same height, even though Balboa is about 66 feet as well. So there's about a 10-foot grade differential as you head down the street. Next slide. And this is the view from Chapala and Ortega, sort of at the back end of the residential development. I will share, some of the design feedback from both HLC and the Planning Commission was really this feeling that it was too dense on the corners of the site. And so how do we sort of step back the density so it feels like it's more interior to the site and less dense along the sidewalks and the pedestrian walkways. And so the architecture team has been working on that. The other piece that was really important was continuing the Paseo network through the mall to Ortega. And I think as the rumor I heard this week from the design team is they have figured out a creative solution to create a Paseo, so that we're hoping that as part of when we come back to council, there'll be some new design renderings that'll be responsive to some of the design feedback that we've already heard to date. Next slide. And then I will say, this is just sort of very conceptual renderings of the affordable housing. Obviously, the team would bring in an affordable housing developer. We've had some preliminary conversations with the Housing Authority, but really these are just sort of very conceptual at this point, and a lot more work would need to happen around the affordable unit concept. So this is sort of loosely how the units would fit. The parking structure is interesting. It's actually built in 3 separate bays, and so the proposal would sort of demolish one of the 3 bays of the parking and build the new building, and along that sort of paseo that runs behind between Canon Perdido to Carrillo and then through to Chapala, and so there'd be shared access with the Canary Hotel. One of the pieces of feedback, next slide, we heard was concern about the roof line of the affordable units, sort of conflicting with the rooftop pool at the Canary. So this is just they did step down the height of the affordable building so that view corridor is maintained. So you can kind of see here the conceptual rendering from the pool deck over and sort of stays above the roof line of the affordable units. Next slide. And again, really just very basic conceptual, like I think there's a lot more work to be done here on sort of the architecture of the affordable units, but this was just to get a sense of what it could look like on this site. Obviously mirrors the architecture of the Canary Hotel. And so a lot of work still to be done on that if that project comes to fruition. I will say before we move into this discussion, as we've continued on the conversations, I think there's still a lot of work to be done on the lot 2, around the lot 2 development, if that is to happen. So what we will probably propose as part of the disposition and development agreement that will come to council in December is that the developer will build their 24 required units within the market rate to begin with. They will deed restrict those units within the market rate units. And then if they are able to get the Lot 2 project to a point where everyone is sort of happy with it and wants to move forward with it, at that point, they would then relocate the folks from the market rate project into the new affordable units. But they wanted to make sure that there was an option. And so currently they're planning to keep the inclusionary on site if and until we can decide if the Lot 2 project will work. So just want to talk a little bit about the city contributions and to the project. And again, because of the complications of the ground lease and the desire to try to figure out how to make a project pencil here, there are some elements of the transaction. And again, these have been contemplated by the city council since that initial conversation in 2023 was the transfer of the city's land to Alliance Bernstein in order to facilitate the development of the parcel, and that would allow the ground leases to be extinguished. In addition, we have been in conversations with the owners of the Nordstrom building. Obviously, critical piece of making this project happen. And so really needing to get them to participate in this project so that they have proposed 100 units of housing on their site, and they cannot do that unless they have our approval. Similarly, AB cannot develop their housing without Shop Off and Nordstrom's approval. So, continuing to work on that conversation. We have been talking with the team about a tax rebate or refund for the city's portion of property tax on the site. For those who are not familiar with the structure of property tax throughout the state of California, for every dollar of property tax in Santa Barbara, the city only gets about 12 or 13 cents of that dollar. The rest of the funds go to the county and school district. So we are looking at the contribution of, or the rebate of that portion of the city's portion of the property tax for a period of 20 years. That would start once the project is actually built, and there'd be a cap on that property tax amount. What we're looking at right now is about $300,000 would be that amount that would be contributed. I will say that currently the city, under the reciprocal easement agreement, spends about $300,000 a year from the general fund to pay for the trash collection, maintenance of the parking garages, and those requirements would go away as part of this new development. Those would become requirements of the developer. So basically that property tax refund equals what the city is currently paying in terms of fees to maintain the site. And then again, contributing a portion of the parking lot too for the affordable housing project. And we are working with the development team to sort of understand the contribution that they would make to the facilitation of that affordable housing. It would be potentially demolishing the parking structure and creating a site-ready site, along, making sure that the contribution is roughly equivalent to what their requirements would be in terms of their affordable housing units. And then in exchange for that, we do get a revitalized sort of site and downtown. We have probably over 600 new residents living in downtown. The development of 80 units of affordable housing, new retail uses. So there'd be sort of redone retail portfolio in the site, and then would really sort of increase property value for this site along with other properties, along with sort of hopefully some additional sales tax revenues. Next slide. I think we talked a little bit about sort of why we are working with Alliance Bernstein on this project and why that's important, but I'm not going to go into that because I want to get to the questions. So next slide. Yeah, and then just sort of the value of the city-owned land underneath the mall has been basically sort of creates really no value to that parcel because of the legal agreements controlling the site right now and the inability to extend the existing ground lease. Next slide. So next steps, oops, back one. So just want to talk a little bit about the disposition and development agreement. This came up at Planning Commission. A disposition and development agreement is very different from a development agreement that the Planning Commission would typically see. A development agreement is really a land use document. It allows a developer to preserve their development rights on a property for a period of 10 years, and really sort of controls what can be developed on the site. A disposition and development agreement is different. It's governed by a different section of the government code and basically establishes how properties are transferred from public agencies to private or other entities. And so really it establishes the terms and conditions of a city property transfer, establishes development processes and timelines, hopefully has some performance guarantees, which we're working through negotiating those in terms of how the project will get developed, and then also the city's financial contribution. Next slide. So the next steps is we will have a public hearing at the City Council for the disposition development agreement that is currently planned for December 2nd. and the land use and entitlement process will continue. Currently, based on the new state housing laws and this project, the only other additional review they would need is HLC design review in 2026. And then they are hoping to get those approvals done and potentially be under construction in 2027. And we have a lot more information. All of this is available on the city's website, along with minutes from the different meetings and videos and just a lot of other additional information. I think that is all for the presentation. So we'll stop there, stop sharing, and happy to start
Yes.
answering questions.
Well, thanks very much. And I'm sure going to be, there are a lot of questions I know that I already have collected, and maybe and others from the floor will certainly surface. But just one of the things the Planning Commission said in their a unanimous vote was the need to have a fuller schedule of public discussion and review. And I'm just picking up on the very last thing you said. Do these steps of review that you already have planned meet that demand or not? What do you think?
I mean, that's the goal, and that was the hope, is we heard from the council as well when we were there in August to really do sort of robust public outreach. So we have been, that is part of the conversations we've been having here with all of the different community groups. And again, the community open houses we've had with surrounding neighbors of the project. So that is the goal, is to get that feedback. And we did do the pre-application review with both Planning Commission and HLC to get that initial design feedback. But again, this development proposal is not required to go back to Planning Commission for further review and approval, given some of the new state housing laws and processes thereabouts. So we're trying to get this feedback and meet with a number of different community stakeholders, so that we can make sure that as this project comes forward, we can respond to what we've heard in terms of the concerns from the community around design and this project.
Well, there are more fundamental objections or questions have to do with the nature of the deal, so to speak, with AB. And maybe we would start with that particular point. And Rob Pearson's here. He was the previous director of the Housing Authority, and out of the depths of his wonderful retirement, he has appeared here. And I think he has some questions he'd like to raise that might be a good way of kicking off that particular part of this issue. Rob, do you want to do that? Are you muted? What happened?
Yep. I think he did.
Where did he go? He got scared. Well, he did say some things on chat that I can share right away. Here's the things he asked on chat include: did AB try to market their lease, and what is anyone's best guess as to its value? He says, what's so bad about letting AB sell the lease? What is the amount? And this is why I wanted him to speak. I don't even know what this is. What is the amount of possessory interest property taxes currently paid by AB and its tenants as private operators? Giving away fee title has always been something I hate. It belongs to public hands in the future of our community. Why can't a sister public agency like the Housing Authority take title and enter into a 99-year lease with AB? They are experienced developers and city staff is not. So that's
Sure,
that.
happy to.
And then I'll throw in another question that comes from Rob Frederick's comments, which was rather than that the if the housing authority finally is the developer of the lot 2 for public housing, that property should be kept in the hands of that public agency, not delivered to the private owner. So those are all maybe interconnected, complicated, wonky, but really, I think fundamental to a
Fundamental
lot of the
questions.
people's feelings. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let me start with the I think Rob Frederick's question, which is probably the easiest, is ultimately the fee title to lot 2 would transfer to the affordable housing developer ultimately. So if that was the housing authority, it would go to sort of AB and then transfer to the housing authority once the site is ready to be developed. And so I think, there has to be that intermediary step, because if the city is not doing the demolition and AB is going to do the demolition of the parking structure, they're not going to want to they're not going to take the liability if they don't have the own, title to the land. And so that's where, and then they would transfer it to the housing authority or another affordable housing developer to develop the actual site. And the reason why we would need to do, and for those who aren't familiar, I'm sure a lot of you are, we would need to do the affordable housing on that separate site is because of tax credit financing. So to be able to finance that property, you cannot use tax credit financing if the units are mixed in with the market rate. That's a state rule. And the other piece of why lot 2, which I know has come up as a question, under state density bonus law, there has to be it has to be a parcel adjacent to the development. In order to allow the developer to take advantage of the development waivers and state density bonus law. And so that is why the lot 2 parcel was initially selected. I think folks will see in the final disposition and development agreement that comes to council in December, we've added another option for AB to pursue, which is if they can find a different alternative adjacent parcel that makes more sense than demolishing the city's parking lot at lot 2, we would allow them to look at that alternative site to develop affordable units. And so that is also being contemplated. So I know this is kind of we've heard the feedback, we've heard the reaction to the concerns about the loss of the parking in lot 2. So really trying to change some of the elements of the deal to allow us to address that. In terms of the ground lease and sort of under the Macy's site and the retail. So, yes, cool, let's transfer it to the housing authority. But again, AB would have to agree to that transfer. The city couldn't just transfer the land to the housing authority. And at this point, given how much they have invested over the last couple of years in pre-development and negotiations with the city and the approvals that the city council has already given for kind of the elements, I don't think that they are at a point where they would transfer the ground lease to another public entity such as the housing authority. I'll want Pat and Dina to weigh in a little bit just in terms of sort of the value, like did AB market the ground lease and the value of that ground lease, given there's only 40 years left on it. So I don't know which one of you wants to maybe help answer that question.
Hey, Dick, I gave you some of those questions and my computer froze. So I had to go out and come back in. So I didn't know what you asked exactly.
Well, I just read what you put
Yeah.
on chat, and
Okay.
she's begun to answer. Kelly has
Okay.
begun to respond to some of that already.
Yeah.
So let's get that out, and then if there's other things you want to
Yep.
bring in, we can keep going.
Could
So
could I just add a tag on it? Is that I really have a lot of respect for Kelly. I've been very impressed with her coming to our city. I think one of the first things I told her, as I said, watch out for the redevelopment project, because I knew that train was already coming out of the station. And I've always been an advocate for fee title to always remain in the public's hand. And that's why in a former life, I was redevelopment manager when we were trying to put bullets at State and Victoria. And so I've had some experience with redevelopment, and I was so pleased that Paseo Nuevo got built where the city retained fee title. I thought it was brilliant. And I guess I have concerns about losing that because we're going to be asking these same questions in 100 years and we won't have any control of it. So part of my question was whether AB has tried to market the lease. I mean, the transfer of the lease is one thing, but the transfer of fee title, so fee title remains in the housing authority's hands or something, because I feel the community's crying for housing. So why not make that the #1 issue and try to build a project around that rather than kind of lot 2, the 80 units may or may not happen kind of thing. That seems not in the city's interest, but definitely in AB's interest in terms of what they want to get. And I just don't, I would like to know if AB tried to market its lease. I don't think it has a lot of value as a former developer who's bought land on leases and bought the fee title. So I'm just wondering what will happen if AB doesn't get this deal. I don't think their lease is going to be worth a whole lot, quite frankly.
Yeah, and I think that's the $1 million question that we, I think and I had Rob, I think you had dropped off when I was responding, but we have created some alternatives that'll be language in the disposition and development agreement where AB could look at an alternative adjacent parcel, not lot 2, in terms of partnering and developing affordable units. So I think we're still in, just trying to figure out how that works. But in terms of transferring to the housing authority, they would have to agree, transferring the fee title to the house, they would have to agree to that. And I just, given the money they have invested so far in pre-development and, the sort of site engineering studies and architecture, I don't think at this point they would they would agree to the transfer to the housing authority or a different public entity at this point. And then
they did agree to a 99-year lease at one point, though, did they not?
70. It was, well, no, they've never agreed to a ground lease. So that original 75-year lease was with the original mall developers. So AB only came in 2021. So they've never, and I think that is the concern, is because there's only 40 years left on the ground lease, there's really not a market value. And I'll let Pat, who is sort of expert in sort of ground leases.
One related question, and I'll shut up, is what is the current amount of possessory interest property tax the community is getting? I assume AB and the other shop owners pay a possessory interest because they're private entities on public land. Do we know that?
Yeah, they do. And so just for folks who don't know what possessory interest is, so because they don't own the fee title, they don't pay property tax, but they pay a property, sort of it's like property tax, but they pay for the assessed value of the buildings and improvements on the site. And that's possessory interest tax. So that is what they're the equivalent of property tax. So when you lease a public property and you build on top of it, you pay possessory interest tax. So they do pay, but they have also filed appeals with the county assessor. So basically the value of the improvements has been cut in half. So the amount of property tax that the city and county and school district are getting has basically been cut in half with the reassessment appeals. So I'm going to let Pat and Dina, our city financial consultants, weigh in a little bit because I'd like them as the expert.
Yeah, Pat, you want to answer the question about the property? Pat did a very complete analysis of this, so
we did look at the property tax, and it's been a while, so I'm going to quote order of magnitude here, but I think what the city receives is something less than $150,000 a year, and that's going to be reduced to $75,000 a year. This is for the parcel that we're talking about here. Both AB and the Shop-Off Group, who controls the Nordstrom site, have both filed appeals for property tax, for possessory interest tax appeal, and they both asked for a 50% reduction. And that's pretty typical as you get into the waning years of a ground lease situation. The value tends to go down, drop off quite sharply.
Sure.
People have been commenting on the question of this value, and I sort of understand what you're saying about the loss of value in terms of in the terms you're using. But wouldn't you say objectively this is some of the most valuable land in the state of California? I mean, just on another way of looking at it, what could be more valuable than this area of Santa Barbara that we're talking about? I mean, I'm speaking like an ordinary citizen, which is all that I am, being confused about the idea that this is something that we can give away.
I mean,
Any more?
Dina and I both have been working on this for some time, and when we first came to the project, we asked all of the same questions that the public is asking now. Like, this surely has to be worth a lot of money, and why can't they just do another ground lease, and et cetera, et cetera. So we've gone through all of these questions ourselves. The city charter is a real limitation on the term of the ground lease, right? And so what the city has now, although they have fee title to the land, it's subject to an existing agreement, which is the ground lease. So the value to the city of the land is essentially the present value of whatever ground rent it expects to get from this lease. And it hasn't received any payments in a long time. So, and as Kelly pointed out, the State Department of Finance took a hard look at this and also concluded that the value of the land to the city as it currently stands is zero.
So if this were a flat piece of land with no development on it and no legal encumbrances on it, then yes, it would be a valuable piece of land. However, what the city owns is basically a slice of land that's underneath a subterranean parking garage. The parking garage lot 1 is leased to Alliance Bernstein, and then they own what is essentially the air rights, the building above it. So the value of land is really determined by what you can do with it. And because of the encumbrances, because of the existing structures that are on it, and because of the terms of the ground lease, the land actually does not have value. So I think that's the thing that's really hard for people to get their heads around, is how do you establish value? And the location is valuable, yes. But and then the other thing that also contributes to the determination of value is what does it cost to develop a site like this relative to the revenue that you could achieve, where the costs are set by a regional market, the construction costs, the cost of labor, the cost of lumber, the cost of concrete, all those things are determined regionally, whereas the revenue is determined by the market itself. So AB can't come in and charge rents that are way above market, because then no one would rent their project. Their rents are essentially have to be on par, or maybe a little better if they think they're offering a better product. But they're constrained by both the cost and the revenues that they can achieve. So in terms of developing this site, they have to be able to deal with the legal restrictions, but also the fact that this is not a flat piece of dirt that we're just starting with, like the redevelopment agency started with in the 1980s with gas stations, parking lots, and just very underutilized sites. This site is actually highly developed.
I just wanted to apologize. My computer has decided that it needs to update its Zoom application, so I am trying to restart it. So I'm here on my phone. I apologize, everyone.
I see you and hear you.
Yes,
So
sorry.
That's good. So there's a lot more that we could explore on this, and it's kind of a rabbit hole that I don't feel able to go right down. But let me get to just, Kelly, the one thing you said. I thought I heard you saying that eventually, if the housing authority were to develop the affordable housing piece, that land would be it would be the owner of that land. Is that correct?
Correct.
So let's look at the affordable housing part of this, because I think all of us who are housing advocates are very concerned about that. So how, you said two things that I understood. One, that there would be in the 230 plus part of this, some of that would be, the 10% of that would be allocated for uh, uh, deed restricted housing until the affordable housing piece, separate piece was built, and then that would that would move over to that, so to speak. So is that a correct way of describing what you're proposing?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so uh, what Fredericks has pointed out, he's worried that 80 is too much for that site to be developed in a good way, in the way that our housing authority has been proud to develop. And he's proposing a smaller number of units. Is there any way to imagine that the mixed mixed situation that would be the beginning could be maintained, and the affordable, the smaller number of affordable units built alongside that? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, so basically keeping the 24
That's
restricted
right.
units and building a smaller project. So I think a couple ways to answer that. I think from a financial viability perspective, the, obviously there's lower rents with deed restricted affordable units, and, the AB is trying to come up with a project that basically they're not even getting close to a market return on the project. So by including the affordable units in their project, that decreases their return even more on that site. So I think that's the goal of why they want to transfer those affordable units to a different property. The 80 units was just their initial proposal of it. I mean, I think there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot more work to be done and a lot more conversations to be had. If, we could contemplate a different sized affordable project on lot 2 if that's what is desired. I think 80, we all thought that 80 affordable units was a great sort of community benefit to get that many affordable housing units. But again, like that's still to be developed. And so I think the disposition and development agreement gives us the flexibility to determine what makes sense once we start to actually go through the process of the development. And so I think that's where we've got options and opportunities to talk with Rob and the Housing Authority. And also, as I mentioned, looking at, are there alternative parcels that are adjacent, that might
Right.
not be for sale, but maybe could be purchased off market, in order to better facilitate an affordable housing project.
So one of my, alongside that is the so-called market rate housing. Now, this is not, the market we're talking about is a luxury market. Is that true? Is that right?
It will be, at market rates, which will be higher rental rates for sure. I mean, that
And
is, yeah.
and what's my sense is that in some cities where there's been a lot of high-end housing built in the central city, including New York City, you have a lot of apartments being bought at high prices, or rented at high prices, but they're not actually occupied very much.
Yeah.
And when you couple that with the image of this grocery store, which I had not heard of before because I'm not in that class, um, uh, uh, the image of the downtown of Santa Barbara being purchased by very wealthy people for their own occasional use doesn't sound like revitalization. It sounds like a disaster.
So a couple ways to respond to that. So we are building into the disposition and development agreement requirements that these units, be occupied, and that they're not used for short-term vacation rentals, or, that they have to actually be occupied. And so I think there are some protections because we are negotiating this deal with them, that we can put that into the agreement. So that has been a key piece of the negotiations, is a concern that we've heard from a number of different parts of the communities. Like, we want people to be downtown. We don't want these to just sit vacant. And so, like, I think in terms of like the rental rates, I mean, I'll just say, like, from my perspective, like, I would be a person that would be renting in a place like this. So I don't necessarily consider myself a super high income individual, but the rents would be affordable to people like myself. That's the sort of market rate rent that is the going rate for kind of new construction in Santa Barbara. So just in terms of, kind of the people that you're thinking about who might rent these apartments, it's those of us that can't afford to buy in Santa Barbara, but would still like, a nice new place to live as well. And so I think that just to put it into context of, when people say, high end rental rates, who rents these, apartments. So it's professional couples, it's, folks like that. So just in terms of context.
Well, fundamentally, what we want most is housing for people who work in the city, and that is one of the big planning goals many of us have been sharing, and that's part of what makes us, at least me, nervous about this particular design. Is that really who's going to be renting or living in those places?
Yeah.
And when you say people like yourself, if you mean someone who is a professional working in the city, yes, I would imagine that would be quite different from the super rich playground that is implied. So we understand that. The question will be how that's enforced, of course. So the uh, the I'm going to, I don't know if there's anyone else has put something into chat. I'm not, let me see if I can check the chat.
There are a few other questions in the chat, and just wanted to sort of emphasize what Kelly was saying a moment ago about them being as primary residences, and then also emphasizing the, as we're looking at local preference, the, Southern Santa Barbara County residents and having that as part of the agreement. Just wanted to make sure that was clear.
That will be part of the agreement, correct?
So we have, I wonder if there are people in the who are attending here who would like to raise questions who haven't put something in the chat. I know there's people who on the planning commission sitting in the room here, and there are other people who've been very active in planning and housing issues. If there are things that anyone wants to raise that we haven't really covered yet. Anybody?
While we're waiting for that question, I just want to go back to the the transfer of the city's land. I will say, as a general rule, I am a supporter of keeping, having the city maintain ownership of land. I think there are certain circumstances and certain, deals where it makes sense for a variety of reasons. And so looking at this one, while it's not something that I think any of us want, it is kind of given the dilemma that we're in with this ground lease situation. It is a decision that, I think the council made 2 years ago when they started in these negotiations, that the transfer of the fee title would always be a part of this deal in order to make it happen. So we own a lot of other city parcels. My goal is to hang on to those. I think owning city land is incredibly important. You'll all see a deal that's coming forward where the city is purchasing, the PATH homeless shelter as PATH goes out of business, so that we can maintain better control and sort of have more control over who operates that shelter. So I am a huge proponent of keeping city land, but sometimes in deal making, there are trade-offs that have to be made.
I've heard people, serious people, say things like the public domain. Is that an avenue for that's an alternative to this whole plan? Does that make any sense, or is that a dead end? And you don't have to necessarily be able to answer that right away, but I'm pretty sure that's a topic that may come up even at the council level when you come back to the council. And then
do you mean eminent domain?
Eminent domain. I'm sorry. Yeah, eminent domain.
Yeah. I mean,
go ahead.
No, I mean the issue with eminent domain is we still have to pay market value. So in order to take over the buildings, we would basically have to buy AB out of all of the value of the buildings on the site. So eminent domain doesn't mean the city gets to just take it. We have to actually pay fair market value and so pay for the value of the improvements. So I don't know that that is something financially that is viable for the
Well,
city.
also legally, the use of eminent domain has been severely restricted. So if this were considered eminent domain for the purposes of what's essentially considered economic development, it's not legal. You can only use eminent domain when you are condemning land for a public, like a utility or
Affordable housing.
school or something like that, a public use. Yeah, and this housing is not considered a public use.
Well, no, the housing authority it's
The
exercised.
housing authority, but not
The
not
city? No, I would find that really, given the surplus property
Yeah,
act.
there were
Anyway.
Yeah, there
They
were
would just be
some
condemned. They
Supreme
would just
Court
be condemning
decisions.
out the lease, not the buildings. And the lease, we've all said, has very little value.
well, but you would still have to pay a fair market value that could be appraised at a significant value.
Okay.
And then I've heard people say, why don't we seek a charter amendment and extend uh, the capacity to lease beyond that 40-year period? And would that does that make any sense as a path?
I think that was considered early on in this process, as I understand from folks who were working early on the deal, and was not pursued at that time. I think at this stage of the process, that would require us to wait till next November to be able to even go forward with the charter amendment. And then if it wasn't successful, I think then we'd still, I mean, basically be back to square one again. And so I do think it is a good thing to think about in terms of sort of amending that charter provision or eliminating that charter provision because it has hamstrung the city in a couple other circumstances. But in terms of kind of where we are at this stage in this deal, sort of pursuing a charter amendment probably is not going to be the solution that is most viable.
Or one other thing that's important about affordable housing, and then I'll call on those whose hands are up, which is how firm is this commitment to affordable housing? One of the issues I remember people being worried about was the term, well, we want to bank affordable housing. I don't even remember how that was being projected, but is there a kind of iffiness about this that you haven't really made clear? What do you think?
So they have to build the 10% affordable in order to qualify
10%.
for
Yeah.
the at least 10% for the height waiver for the state density bonus. So that has to happen. Currently, as we're negotiating the disposition and development agreement, there is not a provision to bank any of the affordable units for future development or for them to be able to sell that. That is not that we don't have a policy pathway for that. If they wanted to pursue that, that would have to come later as a policy decision that the council would make separate from this deal. So that the banking of the affordable units is not going to be contemplated in the disposition and development agreement at this point.
In other words, and I was under the impression from some of what being presented is that the affordable plan has to go forward together with the market
Correct.
rate plan.
They have to be built together.
Diane Black.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. The first one is about the comments that were received at the Planning Commission. So it sounds like they're looking into trying to open up the Paseos a little bit more, and that's great.
Yep.
What about the height and bulk? Is there any work on the height and
I
bulk?
think they're working on some design change. I don't know that everything will be completed by the time we come back in December, but they are trying to make some modifications to the design to be responsive.
And then is the Planning Commission going to have any additional review opportunities? Because, I mean, you say that a development and disposition agreement isn't the same as a development agreement. I understand that, but a development agreement is a big deal, and it is a planning deal, whether or not it has the disposition agreement with it. So it just seems like, it seems wrong. I'll just say, it just seems wrong that the planning commission gets one shot at it and the city council is, gets no more input from them. I think that's really unfortunate if that's the
Mhm.
case, and I would really argue that you should look for another way to get more planning commission input.
Well, I will say we have been, after the planning commission meeting, I did offer an opportunity for all of the planning commissioners to meet with Dina and Pat, myself, and a number have taken us up on that option to sort of talk through and answer their questions. Happy to continue to do that. The other restriction that we're facing is there is a 5 hearing limit on housing projects now, based on state law. So projects like this can only come to approval boards, for
But-
5 hearings total. And
But they
so
haven't even, but they haven't even submitted a project yet.
they have an application in, yeah. So
Oh,
there's
I didn't
they
think they
have
had a formal
yeah,
application.
no, there is
Oh,
their
okay.
application is in.
Okay.
So that's part of the challenge. And I think and again, the type of application, which is an AUD application that they have submitted, that is only subject to HLC review. And so that if there was no ground lease, if there was no city part of this deal, the only review they would get would be at HLC.
Well,
That's
it
pretty
just
amazing.
as
Can I ask one last
please
question?
go ahead, Diane. Yeah, go ahead.
So my final question was on process, and you said that it's slated to come back to the city council on December 2nd. Is that a firm
Mhm.
date? Or because we keep getting dates and then they don't happen. So I'm just curious if that's pretty firm.
Yes, right now it is firm. And I will say that the full draft of the disposition and development agreement will be available as part of that agenda report. And so
Will it
it'll
be
be
available more than 4 days in advance? of the
we're
hearing?
well, it's hopefully we're trying to finalize it. The goal is hopefully to get it out early that week of Thanksgiving. I know it is the Thanksgiving week, which is also a
Mhm.
challenge, but yeah, that we'll try to get it out as early as we can.
And is there, I mean, to me, the ask for more time for public review and discussion of this, as I said, it's part of our Santa Barbara tradition that has served us ultimately why we have the beautiful city that we have. And I'm just thinking that if this is seen as a very strange and weird deal, that has been pushed through because state laws supposedly require. I'm not blaming you. I'm saying that's the environment that you're living in. This is all not going to be happy for a lot of people. So I'm kind of suggesting that just figuring out how we can have a process that actually answers people's anxieties and concerns about this is really important. And so Rich Applebaum, you want to say something?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that you're in a tough position on this, Kelly. So, others have said, and I'll just repeat, the city is giving away a whole lot to make this happen. And AB also is in a position, both are in tough positions. And my question is, do we really don't have the bargaining rights for this? Rob Pearson mentioned preserving the landed state of Victoria when it was going to be given away to bullocks. Rob will remember, as will Dick, that I and Ben Bicel led the campaign that defeated that through a public referendum. So I'm not saying we're going to go that route here. Seems to me a lot hinges on something which I have no way of evaluating, which is that 40 years is insufficient to provide an adequate return on investment. And that sort of has boxed us in. None of those data are publicly available. I understand they can't be publicly available. I gather Arcturus, is that the company, is that the firm that is working out the numbers here? It just seems,
So yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Rich.
this goes back to what Dick was saying also. A lot has been done here without ordinary people like me who aren't developers knowing if this really is the best deal that the city can get. And I know there's urgency here, but you're giving away a whole lot of highly valuable land. I know there are encumbrances on it, which change the picture, but you know, it's just hard to get behind it. That's all. I'll say that I also, if I heard you right, you said that even the 80 units are not definitely a sure thing that's going to wind up in the final development disposition agreement. So, of affordable housing. So I'll just put all that out there.
And I'll ask Pat to talk about the sort of the 40-year ground lease and sort of what the, this is one of the reasons why the city hired Dina and Pat was to have someone come in who has, expertise in this field, to advise the city and to really do a deep dive. They have combed through the developer's pro forma. They have looked at all of the numbers. Again, the pro forma is proprietary information, so that's why we can't share it publicly, unfortunately. I'm happy. But maybe Pat, if you guys could talk about kind of the process, and Dina, the process you guys went through, sort of in reviewing their financials
Sure.
and the
Maybe,
ground lease issue.
yeah, maybe first I'll address the ground lease issue because a ground lease is a pretty esoteric thing. And especially on the West Coast, it's done a lot on the East Coast and in New York. But basically, if you are trying to develop something on a ground lease, you need to go out to the capital markets and go find some money to do it. Anyone who's, excuse me, anyone who's lending on a ground lease development project is going to want the term of the loan plus 10 to 20 years in the term of the ground lease. In order to feel satisfied that they'll be able to recapture their investment. So 40 years is really cutting it very close for a 30-year amortization, and that's a very typical amount of time. The problem with just 40 years, even if you could find a lender that would agree to that, is that once it's up and developed, many developers will then at that point sell it. So let's say you're 5, 6, 7 years in. At that point, you have way less than 40 years remaining, right? And so whoever is looking to potentially buy it now is going to offer you a whole lot less. So it damages the value and it makes getting capital very, very hard to do. So it's kind of a non-starter. If you look at many of the public ground leases, and there's a lot of them where housing has been developed, it's often a 59-year initial term with an absolute option to extend another 39 or 40 years to a maximum of 99 years. And that's sort of one of the preferred alternatives.
All right. Well, I somehow didn't realize there were several comments in chat, but many of the things that you, Kelly, and staff can read, there don't have to be questions for us right now. And we are coming to the, if that's okay, Rick Clausen, you have some good comments there that they can absorb. If you have anything, Rick, you want to say without just relying on what you've written here?
I do. Thank you, Dick. I just want to comment on the outreach process. As has been said time and again, this is an extremely complicated process that's trying to be knitted together. And we're hearing that from experts who are used to dealing with complicated processes. So for schmoes like me, it's extremely complicated, and I don't think the current outreach efforts are reaching the out, meaning people like me. I don't know what the answer is to that, but I don't think that meet and greets in the evening on Paseo Nuevo or defined membership Zooms like this are reaching enough of the people that are going to rise up with pitchforks and torches later on in the process. That's it.
Well, I'm always open to hearing how you think we can do better on that. I mean, I will say we've also had a lot of sort of small group individual meetings with different stakeholders. Happy to do that as well. So if anyone, wants to avail themselves of that, we're happy to, but also happy to have suggestions of how you think we could sort of help get this out and get more input and feedback as we're going through the process. So happy to hear that.
How about closing or using one of the closed promenade blocks on a weekend and have your people there? I don't know if that's doable or would be profitable. I mean, if it would bring people in, but I'm just trying to blue sky this and think, what are some ways that you can reach people that you haven't already tried to do that will catch people? There's a lot of people in the hoods surrounding downtown that they're not being reached, I think, but they all have opinions.
Yeah, we had, I will say there were quite a number of sort of local neighbors at the community open houses we had that were sort of held within the mall at one of the vacant spaces. And so a lot of sort of community members came through those open houses, and that was an opportunity. I think Dina and Pat were both there. City staff were there. The developer was there. So a lot of opportunity for individual kind of one-on-one conversations around the project. So we can look at potentially doing another one of those if that seems to make sense. So looks like there's another question, Dick, in the chat about the amount of.
I see what Rob Pearson's asking. Can Pat share what amount of the AB financing was defaulted on when they foreclosed? I don't know what the that sounds important.
Yeah, I think it's important because it's kind of a proxy for land value. And we've tried a number of different ways to find out exactly what that number is. But here's what we ultimately did. We know that they extended a $120 million line of credit, right? We don't know how much of that line of credit's actually been used. And it gets a little complicated because they have used some of their money to fund this pre-development effort, which has been costly. So we didn't know the number. What we did is we ran the pro formas with the full $120 million in there as a proxy for land value, which we know is too high. That's not realistic, right? And we ran it again at zero, right? Let's assume the land is worth nothing. We credit no land value to them. And even at a zero land value, their return on cost, which is just the very most basic feasibility measure, is 6.2%, but it's far below the 8% target. And so I just want to say, I think a lot of people feel, hey, these slick guys from New York are coming out here and they're taking advantage of us. And Dina and I and our colleagues have gone through all of the assumptions. We have tested this as vigorously as it's possible to test. Every assumption, operating, construction cost, target returns, and we actually agree with the pro formas that they have presented, that we agree with the assumptions. It's a very rare thing because we often find that developers tend to put their thumb on the scale. But I have to say, in my professional opinion, that is not the case here.
And we've seen their full pro forma, so we've seen all their construction costs, what their rents are, and we vetted them also with local developers. So we've talked to developers locally, we've talked to people in the LA region, here in the Bay Area. So we've really done a lot to try to understand the context for the assumptions they're making in their performance, and they've done a lot of work.
Could I, Dick, just for Pat and Dina's response, have you evaluated the Lot 2 proposal? Because the demolition cost to take down part of a garage, I think the 80 units has been thrown out there is a make the community feel good, when I think from a practical standpoint, someone who's looked at what developing housing is all about and what costs go in it, I'd almost rather go out and buy a blank piece of land to make these numbers happen than deal with that garage. So I think that's a little pie in the sky, and AB needs to be told that if they haven't been told that.
Yeah, I have to say conceptually, Rob, I totally agree with you. We're a little bit limited because there's an adjacency requirement, right? And those cost numbers are being developed right now. We have not seen the demolition costs, which is a proxy for land value, right? So what is it going to cost to make this essentially a buildable site?
And
I
I don't
think
think
that's Rob, why we're sort of
okay.
the
I don't think the
option.
Canary Hotel people are going to be very happy either. You know, it's just too dense, it's too small a site for that kind of density.
So what
I
Kelly
think-
said, what you said was that we were encouraging them to suggest an alternative site. Is that a probably a path that's probable?
I don't know yet. And I think that's where we want to give them the flexibility to be. So there's either or options that will be built into the DDA. So that they can build the 24 units within the market rate project to start, and that satisfies their requirement. They can continue to look at the lot 2 option, and then they can look at another alternative adjacent parcel as an option, which may be less costly to to develop. And so I actually, I tend to agree, and I like that they have put forth this alternative adjacent parcel concept, because I think there's some potentially viable options in the area.
Just very briefly, all of the stuff I read on affordable housing, mixing the incomes is really the way we should be doing it. It should go into that new building, and they should be, in my opinion, forced to do a little bit more on the affordable stuff. Even the Section 8 commitment could be delivered to them if they would agree to rent X numbers under Section 8. They get pretty close to market, and I think it's better for the community the more you have mixed income developments. I think that would keep those high-enders who think that they want to live in luxury, maybe thinking twice about renting one of those apartments. And it's happening more and more in Santa Barbara. People that with a lot of money can pay $8,000 a month to have an apartment in Santa Barbara, don't have to invest the capital to buy a condo. So they're starting to rent new apartments in town and then share them with their friends. So it's going to be very important that we guard against that as we go forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Well, any final word would you like to share with us, Kelly? It's been we put you a little bit on the griddle, but that's what.
No, this is great. I'm always happy to engage with all of you, and really happy to continue the conversation if other folks have questions or concerns, and to Rick Clausen's concerns, if there's suggestions for how we can continue to outreach and talk to folks, I'm happy to do that. I appreciate my team being here today to help support in answering the questions and helping us sort of wend our way through this process. It is very complicated, as I think we've all acknowledged, and I've had experience doing deals like this in other communities, and just really appreciate Dina and Pat's input and professional review and input. And I think they've really helped, at least before I even got here, help structure this deal, to the best benefit to the city that we can try and get. And again, there are always trade-offs when we have to look at these projects, and so really just thankful for the time today, and happy to continue having conversations.
Well, thank you, Kelly and Pat and Tess and Dina and Anthony. Quite a good turnout of city staff. We hope to we in SBCAN hope to continue interacting with you not only on this issue but on a lot of the other issues that we all share. And if those of you who are here have registered for this, that means I think that you'll be on our regular mailing list if you haven't been already, to have these monthly encounters, which I learn a lot from, and I hope others do as well. So this is all fraught, and political life is very fraught in many ways, but we're shaping the future. That's one way to look at this. So travel with care. Thank you, everybody. Take
Great.
care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.